Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to be talking about the two duels of George Eacker. Now, if you're familiar with the play Hamilton, you might know the song Blow Us All Away, in which Alexander Hamilton's son, Philip Hamilton, gets into a duel. And you might recall that the man he duels is the name George Eacker, and that's who we're looking at today. But, while that song is a great song and a great play, and gets a lot of things right, it gets one thing wrong and leaves a few things out. So let's get on with it. George Eacker was a young man who grew up in upstate New York in Palatine, which was a heavily German community. His father had fought in the Revolution because the Germans on the frontier were having odds with the Native Americans there, and since the Native Americans sided with the British, those Germans sided with the Americans. His father did go on to serve in the state assembly, and Eacker was raised in this environment, and he did have a good footing when he started in life. George goes down to New York City, where he studies under Henry Brockholst Livingston, who was a future Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And Eacker becomes a lawyer, and he has a very successful practice. He also becomes involved with Tammany Hall, and yes, Tammany Hall was around in the 1790s. It was started in a large part by Aaron Burr. So, George Eacker associating with Aaron Burr, you can see the foreshadowing here. He didn't necessarily get along swimmingly with the Hamilton family. Now, in 1801, George Eacker gave a speech for the 4th of July celebration. He was a popular and wealthy young man, and he was chosen to give New York City's oration to celebrate the 4th of July. And this he did. And by all accounts, his speech mostly focused on patriotism and being a patriot, especially in a newly federal nation. But certain opponents didn't necessarily take it as simply being about patriotism, and his opponents got offended. Apparently there was no reason for this, but they did. One of these people was a young man named Philip Hamilton. So, do need to bring up that totally left out of the song and the play in general, which makes a lot of sense. You need to take some artistic licensing. There are things that are going to have to get cut to squeeze into just a 2.5-hour play. But there was Philip Hamilton's friend, Stephen Price, is not in there. But it needs to be noted that Stephen Price also was offended, and Philip Hamilton and Stephen Price went, and much like in the song, found George Eacker at the theater in his box waiting to watch a play. And much like the song, they confronted him in the box. Now, unlike the song George Eacker calls Philip a scoundrel. And while that's close, that's not actually what he said. He called them damned rascals. And damned rascals, which doesn't, to our modern ears, sound all that bad, was at the time a very, very offensive thing to say to someone, especially in public. But you need to consider it from Eacker's perspective. He's sitting there waiting for his play to start, just gave this great speech everyone's so pumped about, and in come two dudes who start, yelling at you and waving fingers in the middle of the theater. So of course he stands up for himself and calls them damn rascals, and of course they respond by challenging him to a duel. Now, it's common knowledge at this point that, or it should be by this point in the conversation, that Philip Hamilton did duel with George Eacker, and Hamilton was shot and died that day. Now, the play says that Philip Hamilton shot into the sky. Maybe it insinuates that Philip Hamilton was innocent in this situation. Probably not. And I say probably not because 2 days after the encounter, George Eacker dueled, but not with Philip Hamilton. He dueled with Stephen Price. He had challenged them both to a duel. And Price and Eacker exchanged 4 volleys. And no one was hit. And they were like, okay, are we done here? And like, I'm satisfied. We're satisfied. Okay, they shot at each other, couldn't hit each other, but you only take so many shots before it's like, we've proven our point. They go home, and then Eacker comes back the next day to duel with Hamilton. He's on day 2 of a duel of 2 guys who embarrassed him in public. And no matter what Philip Hamilton did, whether he shot into the air or not, it is not very surprising that Eacker lined up his aim and shot for Hamilton. Now, I try and stay unbiased. The play Hamilton does a fair job of being unbiased, to be honest, but it is based on the Hamilton family. I do like to try and look at it from both players' perspectives, and I can see why Eacker would have shot to kill. Now, just to elaborate on Eacker's life, unfortunately for this man, whatever your opinion of him, he went on to, continue being a prosperous lawyer, but just a few months after the duel, he served in a volunteer fire department. And while he was out putting out a fire late one night in the rain, he caught a cold. And that turned into tuberculosis, which was then known as consumption. And just 2 years later, he died himself at 30 years old of consumption. And I'm only just realizing now that someone called me out for having 2 people die early in the last 2 videos, and this is the third. This is the 3rd straight video where they die young. Tomorrow, I promise, I will bring you someone who lives a long, long time. But for today, that is the 2 duels of George Eacker. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit like. If you're one of the people who saw me go live a bunch of times this weekend and were thoroughly disappointed by what came on, I apologize. I do believe I figured out how to go live on YouTube appropriately. So next weekend, probably Sunday, I think would be a nice day. I will wrap up this week's articles I write for Founder of the Day, which will be different than what we discussed here. Thank you so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe. I will see you with another video tomorrow.